Okay, so I'm assuming everybody's done because the noise level's rising. So what happens in Japan? I don't know. I figured you work it all out, so you have to tell me what happens. Okay, so the price of autos increased, and the price of food was constant. Okay. Why? Oh, okay. So the first thing that happens is the price of automobiles goes up, which raises the demand for labor in the auto industry. Right? So the demand for labor curve shifts higher. We've got a higher price here for autos, now the world price. And this is going to lift the wage, the equilibrium wage, in both industries. So notice that we've got a fixed labor supply in the economy given by the horizontal axis of this diagram. So simply increasing the demand in one industry, leaving the demand in the other industry the same, says, of course, that there's no aggregate increase in the demand for labor, which is why the wages go up, in this case, in both industries. Right, there may be some period of time before workers move between the two industries, but we've assumed here this is a mobile resource, and in a relatively small economy with mobile resources, you can generally move pretty quickly. Okay. And was suggested the demand for, or the allocation of labor changes so we have more workers in the auto industry and fewer workers in the food industry. What happens to the marginal product of labor in the auto industry? Goes up. Okay, so hold on to that thought for just a minute. We'll come back to it. So we want to ask ourselves, what happens to the marginal product of labor? Okay, so this is Japanese capital owners. And here we know that the price of autos went up, so the demand for capital rose. So the return to capital increased. What else happened? Anything else? So what happens to the marginal product of capital? It also increases because we have more workers, right? So we've got more workers in the auto industry, fixed amount of capital, so the marginal product of capital also increases, which again increases the demand for capital. And against that fixed supply, that means the return to capital rose even more. Now remember, capital is specific to the export industry. Okay, so we had a fixed amount of capital, but we now have more workers with each piece of capital, which is why the marginal product of capital went up. Now let's invert that. We've still got a fixed amount of capital, but we've got more workers on each piece of capital equipment, which in essence means each worker has less capital to work with. So what happens to the marginal product of labor? It decreases. So how do we see that here, or how do we show that here? Any ideas from the back half? How do we show a decline in the marginal product of labor? Okay, so we started at this equilibrium point, right? The increase in the price of autos moves us straight up to here. Then, as we increase the amount of labor that we have in the auto industry, each worker is going to end up with less and less capital. The marginal product of labor falls along this curve. That's our diminishing marginal product of labor. So it's not no shift in the curve because it's changing the marginal product. It's an actual movement along the curve. And let's see, this is Japanese landowners. And so what happens here? We're leaving the price of food fixed, so we know that can't happen. Nothing happens there. So whatever occurs must happen to the marginal product of land. We have fewer workers in the food industry, which means that the marginal product of land will decrease. Or that is, yeah, and the demand, therefore, the demand for land decreases, resulting in lower return to landowners. Remember, this is for Japan the import competing industry. So if we look at the return to the landowners, their return fell relative, and the price of autos rose, so they're definitely worse off in terms of automobiles, and their return fell and the price of food was constant, so their rate of return fell, definitely worse off. And while we didn't label that for capital owners are definitely better off in terms of both goods. So what we see for Japan is the relative price of autos rises. For workers, it's ambiguous, again, depending upon the consumption pattern. The owners of capital are definitely better off, and landowners are definitely worse off. Again, remember, this is our export industry, and this is our import competing industry. I'm sorry? Right, so the question was, can I explain why we call this the competing industry as opposed to just the import industry? Remember, there's domestic factors of production that are being used to produce food in Japan. Right? We're importing food from the United States, but we're also producing food in Japan. There are workers still working in the food industry. There's also landowners still being used in the food industry. But because we're producing less food, there's less demand for those factors of production. And that's why this industry is competing with those U.S. imports of food, and it's that additional competition that's driving down their returns. So again, just in more general terms, and we want to remember, trade benefits specific factors in the export sector, trade hurts specific factors in the import competing sectors, and it's ambiguous in terms of the mobile factor. Now remember, we showed last week at the end of our discussion about the Heckscher-Ohlin model, even when we have winners and losers from international trade, we know that in the aggregate, from an economic perspective, the country's on a higher country indifference curve. The country has larger consumption possibilities. It's possible for everybody to consume exactly what they did in autarky, and for some people to even have more. Now that's a distribution of income issue within the country, and that's an issue that we'll address in more detail in the future when we talk about trade policy and trade protectionism. Have a great weekend, and we'll do something else on Tuesday.